LG is still making smartphones. You either really know this and you're surprised that I'm mentioning it right now, or you're shocked that they are. But either way, you should know it, because in a world where a lot of manufacturers are cutting key features to consumers like the headphone jack, LG is holding their ground and keeping those features. Welcome to my review of the LG V60, a phone that does a lot more than just keep the headphone jack. Let's dive in. It starts with a phone that's big, like really big. Here's it next to the iPhone X. I have pretty average sized hands, and this phone wrecks any hope of using it one-handed. It does have a one-handed mode built into the software, which helps, but the overall footprint of the phone is just very large. The design is pretty reminiscent of a flagship from a couple years ago, with the small style notch, thick borders around the display, and the horizontal camera array on the back. The design in the back doesn't bother me, and it won't bother most people, but the setup on the front does bother me. I think that the hole punch style looks cleaner, or even a smaller teardrop style notch. I think that this type of notch paired with thicker bezels just does not scream, I'm a premium phone, pay a lot for me. And in a market where there's so many amazing Android phones coming out, I think that it needs to look its part of being a premium flagship phone. And I know that in my last video, I mentioned that the iPhone SE2 did not need to have like a stellar design, but I think that the consumer generally that goes for an iPhone SE2 does not care as much about the design as a consumer that goes for a premium high-end Android phone, especially when in the Android market you have a lot of options like hole punch or a pop-up camera. Like, there's so many options to make the notch hidden or just to make the phone look a little bit more futuristic that it's a little hard as a consumer to look at a phone that looks like this and feel like it's worth as much as the phones that look a lot cleaner. That's just my take. Let me know in the poll above if you think that this design is like a turnoff or if you really do not care about it. I know that it's kind of mixed. One advantage of the thicker side bezels is that the display does not go over the edges. It's a flat display. When curved displays started becoming popular a couple years ago, I was kind of enamored by them. They looked really futuristic. But as I've used many phones that have a curved display, I realized that they're not all the rage. The actual daily life with them is not as cool as they look because of the durability issues that come with having a screen over the sides. It's harder to find a case or a screen protector, and also because a lot of the phones have poor palm rejection, so you often get a lot of accidental touches. So both of those things lead to a worse experience. So that's all to say that I'm really happy that the V60 has a flat display, so I don't need to worry about that. And the actual display is really good. LG has shown with this phone what they prioritize with a smartphone, and keeping up with the Joneses is not on the list. This display is not a high refresh rate panel, and it's also not a super high resolution panel. It's only 1080p. Hearing that might make you immediately disqualify this phone, but as someone that has used several phones with high refresh rate, I don't think it should disqualify the phone for you. While I do really like high refresh rate, and I do notice a difference, I do not think that it's a deal breaker for a phone not to have it, and the fact that this phone doesn't have it, and it's also a 1080p panel, means that the battery life on here is excellent. We're going to talk about the battery a little bit later. But I also want to note that when I was using the S20 Ultra, the only resolution option when using high refresh rate was 1080p, and it looked fine, and it's the same thing on the V60. Things look pretty sharp. I, of course, am a fan of high resolution displays, but this display looks pretty good for me. The colors are awesome. I like consuming content on it, so it gets my thumbs up. Obviously, it would have been nice to have all the high-end specs of high refresh rate and high res, but that wasn't the priority with this phone. The LG V60 also comes with a dual screen option, so you can get two displays, and I'm going to mention that more thoroughly at the end of the video, and I'll tell you what I think about it. Wrapping up the design though, it has a dedicated button for Google Assistant, which I'm a fan of, but the placement required the volume buttons to be put higher than I would like them to be. The phone is big to begin with, and the volume buttons being so high makes them hard to reach with one hand. I would kind of like the position to be reversed, meaning the volume button's where the assistant button is and the assistant button where the volume button is, because I tend to use the volume buttons a lot more than the assistant button, so it would be a lot more convenient to have them lower. Instead, I constantly hit the assistant button when I'm trying to hit volume down. In terms of color, the color scheme that I have here looks really good, and the abrupt curves in the back panel also feel really good in the hand, and it adds a little bit of grip. The phone has USB Type-C and a headphone jack, and I think that is one of the main selling points. If you're really frustrated that your phone doesn't have a headphone jack, V60 does. And not only does it have a headphone jack, but it also has a built-in DAC, so you're going to get a really high-quality audio experience. So if you enjoy high-quality audio on the go, this is definitely the phone for you. The speaker is also pretty good. It's definitely not like best in class, but I think that it will sound okay. But the main area where you're going to be getting great audio quality is via the headphone jack. So we talked about the display and the build and the battery life briefly, but we still need to dive into the battery life more thoroughly, talk about the camera system, and we need to talk about software and performance. So that's a lot to cover. Let's do it. The phone has a pretty bad software experience. That might sound blunt, but it's the truth. My AT&T version came with a ton of pre-installed applications and a heavier redesign than I'm used to. I'm definitely biased towards phones that have more of a stock Android experience, so use that to frame my opinion on this, but I was not extremely psyched when I powered on the phone and saw many pages of pre-installed applications. In fact, I was the opposite of psyched. You can disable a lot of the applications, which is nice, and I also want to mention that you can of course download a launcher, but when you're opening up a premium phone, you want to be excited about it the second you open it, and this software just doesn't give that impression for me. And even moving past like the aesthetics of it, which I'm not in love with, I've had a lot of glitches and stuff. So when I first unboxed the phone and I started using it, apps were crashing a ton and things felt pretty slow and it was weird. And then I updated the software and it's gotten a lot better since then, but I still experienced some crashes and some latency, and that should not be happening based on the internals, like the RAM and the chip this phone has is very high end. So it should be a buttery experience, and it just hasn't always been that. Sometimes it's extremely smooth as I would expect it to be, and other times apps crash. The app that crashes the most for me is the gallery application. It crashes almost every single time I use it. I don't know if this is a software bug that needs to be updated, but LG, please update it. It's gotten so bad to the point where I just don't use the app anymore because it crashes nearly every time I use it. So I'm using Google Photos now, but that is of course a little inconvenient because the camera app opens up your pictures by default in the gallery. The actual camera app has been good. I noticed a little bit of latency at times, but overall, it's been fine. Most of the latency just comes in like a drop frame here or there, and I think it's just because the software is heavy. When I switched to a launcher, it got a little bit better, but if you really care about having like a stock Android experience right away, this phone does not have that. I would love LG to kind of update their software. We saw brands like Samsung have terrible software for years, and they've slowly kind of made it more stock and better, and I think that LG should strive to do the same thing. I see phones like the OnePlus 8 Pro kind of kill it with having great software experiences and regular software updates and things like that, and I would love the LG V60 to have the same thing. On a happier note, the battery life, as I said, is amazing. So it's a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and when you pair that with the fact that it's a 1080p 60Hz display, the battery life is pretty fire. So I'm staying home and quarantining right now, which I hope all of you guys are doing as well, so we can flatten the curve. But because of that, I can't give you like a running around type of battery life because I just don't have those types of days. But right now, when I'm using it for social media and watching videos and writing scripts and things like that, I'm getting really good battery life, which is still pretty heavy use. So I'm getting a solid day to day and a half on heavy use, and I've heard about some reviewers getting like 2 days. So I would say that this is the best battery life on a phone that I've tested recently, which is high praise. And if you really care about getting a phone that has great battery life, this is a solid contender for that. So the final aspect of this phone that we got to talk about before we jump into the dual display is the camera. And I gotta say, I don't feel like LG gets enough credit for being one of the first manufacturers to put on an ultra-wide lens, but they were, and it's still here, and it's really good. Obviously, camera tests are a little bit harder to do right now because you have to stay at home, so I want to apologize in advance. The samples are only going to be indoor. I would love to go out and shoot a bunch of stuff for you, but it's just not safe, and I'm sorry. I'm going to link below a video that tests out the camera for outdoor stuff a little bit more thoroughly, so you can watch that after this video. But my general consensus for indoor shots is the following. Pretty good camera. It produces a photo that I'm happy to post most of the time. It's not the best camera on a smartphone right now. I think it's probably still like 3rd or 4th place with the Pixel, the iPhone 11 Pro, and the S20 Plus kind of being ahead of it. The S20 Plus and the LG V60 are tied some of the time. And I think that the LG V60 kind of gets hurt a little bit by the fact that it doesn't have a telephoto lens. So for a 2x crop, it's using the main sensor, which still looks pretty good, and I don't really notice a loss in quality. But when you get to like 5 or 10x crop, you definitely notice the quality is not as good. Obviously, I'm happy that they picked to do an ultra wide over a telephoto, but with a lot of manufacturers having a telephoto now, it would have been nice to kind of see LG put that on so they could kind of compete in the zoom as well. The photos generally though are pretty good. The color is good. The exposure is normally pretty good. And you can actually shoot some macro shots as well, which is really cool. I've noticed that in lower light scenarios, the phone has a little bit trouble focusing when you zoom into like 2x. And I've also noticed, and this is a software thing, that when I go from 1 to like 10x and then I go back out, it brings me to the ultra wide instead of bringing me to the primary. That's kind of annoying. I know that's like really a small thing, but it's something that I noticed over and over again. So I would love if by default it brought you back to the primary lens. I was also pretty impressed with the video. It has 4K and 8K modes, and back video looks really good, and front video in 4K also looks really good. So that was pretty impressive. Again, I don't think it's like the best camera on a phone, especially for video. I think that the iPhone 11 Pro still has the best overall video, but I think that it can stay in the race, which is nice. And a lot of the times, again, I'd be very psyched to post a photo from this phone. So good things on that front. So as a standalone phone, the V60 is initially hard to widely recommend because when compared to the OnePlus 8 Pro or the S20 Plus, it initially seems like an inferior product. An older looking design with a worse 60Hz refresh rate display, and in my opinion, a worse camera often than the S20. But it does have some things going for it, like epic battery life, and a headphone jack, and a cheaper price. Let's talk about that price because it's a little bit variable. So some carriers are selling the LG V60 as a standalone product, and then other carriers are selling the LG V60 with the dual screen, and the price is obviously a little bit increased. And I think for the increase in price, the dual screen is worth it, even though I don't think it's like the selling point of this product. Initially, when I saw the commercials for the V60 dual screen, I thought, yes, this is gonna be like a Samsung Fold, but cheaper, but it's not. The Samsung Foldable is kind of like phone tablet experience where you kind of have one piece of content that you can expand. Like, yes, sometimes I use it for multitasking, but most of the time I'm using it to see a photo larger or video larger or to read my book larger, one piece of content bigger. Whereas the V60 is two separate screens, so it's kind of like interacting with two totally different pieces of content rather than watching one piece of content larger. And that has its benefits, but it does not seem as useful to me as a foldable. But it is cheaper, and it is not going to be plagued by the durability issues that foldables have right now with having to use plastic screens and things like that. So that's nice. Again, I think it's like a completely different form factor. I don't think it's even in the same category necessarily as a foldable, but when we look at like different form factors from the norm, it's kind of like foldable and this are the main two. And I think that LG did a really good job with this. It's kind of a case, so it adds some protection, and then you also have the display. But some of the design flaws that I noticed would be the charging port. The fact that you need an accessory in order to charge while the case is on is annoying. It would have been nice just to have a pass-through port. And also, when you want to use the phone and you don't want to have the second display, you have to flip it over to the back, and then that means that the display could be prone to getting scratched or just getting a ton of fingerprints on it. So those two things are definitely some design flaws, but overall I enjoyed using it, and I think for like gaming controls it could be really useful, or for reading tweets and writing a script, or reading a spec sheet and writing a script. All cool use cases, and I'm excited to see LG kind of innovating and going a little bit outside the box of what the typical smartphone looks like. That said, it did not sell me on this phone. So my final verdict on the V60 is that it's not the phone for me because I really like extremely high-end specs and a cool looking design, something that I would be more likely to get on the 8 Pro or the S20 Plus with a high refresh rate and less intrusive bezels. But I think that the V60 is for people that really care more about, again, the headphone jack, or getting epic battery life, or getting a flagship style smartphone for a little bit less money. If you are that person, I think you're really gonna enjoy the V60, as long as you know that there are going to be some shortcomings that I've mentioned in this video. I wanna know what you think of the V60 though, so leave your answer, would you buy it, in the poll above. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, and also YouTube is doing this new thing where they tell you how many people have the bell on that are subscribed to you, because of course we all know that YouTube does not do the best job distributing your content all the time, so you kind of need to have the bell on to know when I post a new video. And like 70% of you still need to turn on the bell. So be sure to do that like right now. This next month of content is absolutely stacked. Just to give you a little preview, we have the iPhone SE 2, we have the 8 Pro and 8 Pro Plus, and a couple other dope products thrown in there. So I'm really excited about it. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see that. Like this video if you enjoyed it. And I also put together a playlist of other content I think you're going to enjoy. So you can watch that right here and subscribe right here. And I'll catch you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this one. Hope you're staying safe and staying home. Catch you in the next one. Bye.